I had a profound realization when I was in my early 40s. I was playing a game in the middle of a 5-day self-development training, and I was in a room with about 70 other adults. And the other 70 or so were in another room across the hall. And the trainer for the overall training, before he had separated us into two groups, had given us a bunch of instructions. It seemed really simple at first. He told us that we'd play this game for a few rounds, and all we had to do each round was to cast a vote, either this way or this other way. He went on to give us other rules. He said, the purpose of the game is to score the greatest number of positive points. He told us that a runner from the trainer would enter each room at the end of each round of voting and let each group know how the other group had voted so that we would have that information to make our decision about our votes in the next round. He also told us that a couple of different rounds would have a multiplier applied to them so the points would be magnified. And this seemed like a lot. But there we were, our team in our room, ready to play. But you know, these rules were complicated. There was all these different possibilities. And as you might imagine, an accountant on our team emerged as the leader and successfully guided us through the first several rounds of voting. But as you might also imagine, you know, as the runner would come into the room and tell us what the vote was for the other team each time, there'd be all this debate about which way we should vote this time, you know, because like maybe points would go up, points would go down, and certain combination would deduct points from both teams. And so the energy in the room continued to rise and get more and more stressful. And ultimately it rose to a point of frenzy. And the accountant was becoming increasingly overwhelmed. And so we found ourselves in the last round with time running out, and this guy's almost catatonic in the corner. He's like this. And I'm thinking, somebody's going to make this thing happen, and I decided it was going to be me. And so I took a table and I shoved it up in the corner, and I jumped up on this table where I could see everybody and everybody could see me and hear me. And I got everybody's attention. And I said, hey, everybody, this is what's going to happen. We're going to vote on the count of 3 in about 30 seconds. And I let that sink for a second. And I made my case. I said, you know, we have to vote this way. This one way. I can't remember what they're called anymore. Because, you know, we had a thin margin at the time. And if we vote this way, we'll get 15 points and simultaneously deduct 15 from the other team and have an even bigger margin of victory. And the other possibility is that the other team votes the same way, in which case, because of all these different combinations, it would deduct a certain number of points, but the same number of points for both teams. And so we would maintain our narrow margin and we would win. And we did. And the trainer called both teams back into the big training hall to debrief this thing, ask us a bunch of questions so we could all see how we played the game. He's asking one question after another, and I'm really preoccupied with judgments about myself. I noticed how I hadn't really wanted to do the work to think through all these different possibilities, and I was content to let somebody else take the lead. But I was proud of myself for stepping up, you know, as time was running out and saving the day. Eventually, the trainer got to this one question that really changed my life, and he said, hey guys, what was the purpose of the game? Nobody said anything because we were all a little suspicious that was a catch. But I got impatient and I said, purpose of the game is to score the greatest number of points. And the trainer said, no. The purpose of the game was to score the greatest number of positive points. And did you do that? And I said, yes. And he said, yeah, let's see. You guys into the game with, I don't know, 20 positive points, and the other team had minus whatever they had. And then he went on to tell us that he played this game all the time, all over the country. And he played it some years back in a much larger market, LA, I think. And there was a 90-something-year-old woman on one of the teams that proposed to her team that they send a representative across the hall to the other room to consider the different possibilities of voting each time, such that they could come up with a collaborative and cooperative decision about how they vote, so as to, wait for it, score the greatest number of positive points. And the trainer pointed out to us, you see, if each one of you guys, each team, had voted this one particular way each time, you each would have amassed 27 points and 0 negative points, for a total of 54 positive points and 0 negative points. And that was a little different from the results that you guys created. And then he asked this question, imagine what life would be like if we played win-win when we can, instead of win-lose so automatically. And I suddenly felt sick to my stomach. I felt small. I felt embarrassed. I felt ashamed, actually. I had become so conditioned, as most of us are. We've created this world where there's so much emphasis on immediate gratification. And in a context of separation and division, I was so programmed to create an immediate and decisive win that I wasn't inclined to look for and recognize an opportunity for a greater net win, one where everybody wins. At that point in my life, by most societal standards, I had a life that looked pretty good. I was an architect, and I was part owner and partner in my firm. I had a family and a young son at home and a nice house and a lifetime martial arts practice. But I couldn't unsee what I had now seen. And it really ate at me. And I started thinking about water. You know how water takes the shape of any vessel it's poured into? And how people are so much like water. And we take on the quality and characteristics of the environment that we regularly engage in. And I started wondering, could I plug into, or maybe even create a new container, a new environment where we could facilitate and normalize this culture of win-win and cooperation? So I set the reset button on my life. And in 2007, I opened the doors to Asheville Sun Soo Martial Arts. Sun Soo is Korean for pure or pure spirit. And I wrote a mission statement. The written mission statement was to make the greatest positive difference for the greatest number of people. And the vision was to create this environment where people would work together to make progress. And that progress would be measured by structure and amplified by community. And then they'd be motivated to propagate out into the world kindness and generosity. That was the idea. But in order for this to work, this environment had to have elements of the world at large, but with the difference that we would facilitate this new culture. And so when you come into our school as a new white belt, it's a lot. It's a giant space. It's 12,500 square feet. There's 20-foot high ceilings. There are all these people in uniforms, and there's all these different colored belts. There's 30 classes a week on the schedule. And there's garage doors going up and down. And there's lots of yelling and fast moves. Oh my God. And then you look across the mat and there's this belt ladder on the wall, you know, where I've like shown all the different levels that people can go up through. And the first belt's a white belt, and the highest is 9th degree black belt. And you go up through all these different colors, and you eventually enter the black belts. And there's spaces between the belts. And the spaces get bigger and bigger because, you know, it takes more time to go from one rank to the next. 40 years, by the way, is the shortest period of time that somebody can go from white belt to 9th degree black belt legitimately. And you're thinking, there's no way. I'm not doing that. But we don't ask you to do that in a short period of time. What we tell you instead is, we're going to keep you immersed in all that stuff because, you know, that's like the world. But we're only going to hold you formally responsible for this much. And we're going to teach you that much really, really well. And we're going to let you get lots of practice with all these different practitioners at different skill levels, which is really good for them in the process, by the way. And then we tell you that the way you're going to move forward in pursuit of the higher ranks is that you're going to do this testing thing one day, and you're going to go up in front of a bunch of judges, and you're going to demonstrate your moves in front of a crowd of about 500 people. And most people don't do anything in front of 500 people. But you're going to get in front of 500 people and do a bunch of new moves, and you're going to be in this uniform that looks like pajamas. You're going to be really nervous, and you're probably not going to remember anything that you did when you're leaving the mat. But what you will realize and what you will remember is that you accomplished what you walked out intending to do, and that 500 people cheered for you, and you didn't die. And you just got your first win, your first victory. And we move you to white, yellow belt. And now the next step, yellow belt, doesn't seem nearly as foreboding as they do when you first walked in the door. And now your gears are engaged, and you're on your way. making progress, especially measurable progress, is validating. Making progress in community is amplifying and sustaining. Community is potent. Community is powerful. It holds energy. It's the mechanism by which we engage with other people and see and understand ourselves through multiple lenses and develop a balanced perspective of our identity. A few years ago, we enrolled a new student named Steven. He was 5 at the time. And he was a great fit for our youngest class level. We call it Mighty Tigers and Mighty Lions. It's full of 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. And you know, he fit right in. They're all about this big. Steven was really smart. And he made progress really quickly. And in a really short period of time, he was ready to move up to the kids beginner class with the older kids, most of whom are 6 to 10. But what I haven't yet told you is that Steven was dwarf. He had dwarfism. His parents were proud of him for all this progress he made, especially in a short period of time, but they were freaked out at the notion that he was going to be in this class where all the other kids were noticeably bigger than him. And they resisted him moving up. They really wanted him to stay in the younger kids class. And after some conversation, they realized that this would just be putting off the inevitable. So the day came when it was time for Stephen to have his first class. And here was the scene. We had like 50 kids out on the mat. And it was a cold winter day outside, and the lobby's packed with all his parents. We had 60 or 70 parents in the lobby. Cozy inside. Room was brimming with energy. And at first, parents in the lobby didn't really notice what was going on. Stephen's parents did. They're sitting up straight, shoulders are hiked up high. They got eyes are glassy. And I decided to just go ahead and get all the stuff out on the table. So I invite Stephen up to the front of the room. I didn't know what I was going to do. They're looking at me like, what am I going to do? I'm not really sure. But I'm going with it at this point. And so I say, hey guys, we got a new student today. This is Stephen. Everybody say hey to Stephen. Say, hi, Stephen. And I said, hey, don't you think it's cool? It's so cool how, you know, in so many ways we're the same. Don't you guys think that's cool? Yes, sir. And I said, and you know, isn't it also really cool how in some ways we're different? Yes, sir. So I go a little further and I say, hey, who can tell me a way that Stephen and I are similar? All these hands go up. I call on this girl in the front row. She goes, you're both boys. And I said, yes, we're both boys. Isn't that awesome? We're both boys. And I'm like, okay, this is going. And so then I asked the next question. I said, hey, who can tell me a way that Stephen and I are different? And remember, Stephen's standing right next to me. I caught my eyes over Stephen's parents. They're sitting up really straight and rigid at this point. So are all the other parents. Everybody's paying attention. Everybody knows what's coming next. I call on this boy in the back row, and he goes, Stephen's got hair! And we were up. And I glanced over to Stephen's parents, and tears are streaming down their face. Giant smile on their face, though. This guy, big grin on his face, and his Albert Einstein hair is spilling out in all directions. But in that moment, something broke. And what broke were the shackles called dwarfism. And what was born was this cool kid who was smart, had a big head of hair, and was funny, and was pretty good at his martial arts. And his life was going to be different from that point forward, and not just from his own newfound confidence and excitement about all these other things that he was now going to be willing to take on because he wasn't going to be afraid anymore that he was going to be rejected, but also because his parents saw him differently at that point, and they didn't have to be so overprotected anymore. So the magic of community is that we can see ourselves. And we can see ourselves without distortion. You know, in relative isolation, it's really easy. It's so easy to lock onto an attribute and see that disproportionately. We give it hyper focus, and then we develop this identity that's not accurate and it's not necessary. The solution is to connect with community in relations to lots of people. And the greater variety and greater diversity, the better. Because then we see ourselves accurately, and we take on confidence, and we can move forward. And as we move forward in community and in contribution to each other, that becomes what we get used to. And contribution begins to be second nature. And we have no idea where that might go. And sometimes the seeds that we plant grow in the most amazing ways. When I was 10, I started my martial arts practice. But I started my martial arts practice because I had been bullied for, I had been being bullied for 2 years. But I didn't really have to resolve it because my family struggled with money when I was young, and we were constantly moving. And so, one bully would cause a problem and then we'd move. But, life's really awesome. It just keeps giving us the same situation. Eventually we stop moving. The bully's really big. So my best friend at the time comes to me one day and he says, "Hey man, you want to take karate classes with me and my whole family?" I was like, "Yes." I went home and asked my parents, and my dad said, "We can't afford it." And I had the kind of dad that when he said that, that was it. So I'm back to school the next day with disappointing news, and I tell my friend, I had no idea he was going to do what he did next. He went home and he talked to his parents. He came back the next day and he said, "My dad, whom I had not yet met, and whose last name was Godly, by the way, said he would pay for your whole first year." And I thought I had won the lottery. I tried really hard in class. I was pretty motivated. And in a few short months, I learned enough to make the bullying stop, change the trajectory of my life. It was amazing. I was really enjoying my practice. But, that first year that Mr. Godley purchased from me came to an end. And my parents still couldn't afford it at that point, so I went to my teacher and I told him that I had to stop. And what he did next, I didn't expect. He took a step close to me and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "You're a good student and you're going to keep practicing. And you're going to pay for your practice. And the way you're going to pay for your practice is you're going to wash the mirrors, and you're going to mop the floors, and you're going to clean the toilets." And I said, "Yes, sir." He had such dignity and declaration in his comments that he rewrote in just a few seconds one of the stories by which I had defined myself. And it was a story called, "I don't have what it takes to have this experience that I want." And in just a few seconds, he rewrote that story to be, "I have everything it takes to create what I want." And so do all of us, almost all the time. Ashwa Sun Soo turned 18 years old a couple months ago, 1 month ago. And I was calculating the other day that over all those years, we've now trained approximately 8,000 students on our mats. And we've inspired countless tens of thousands more through public parades, demonstrations, seminars. We've won awards for excellence and innovation for 17 years straight. In the year 2021, we were voted the #1 martial arts school in the country. In 2019, right before COVID hit, I was feeling full of gratitude. It was year 12 in our development, and I really wanted to thank Mr. Bob Godley for giving me that year of practice, and my first teacher, Grandmaster Tony Morris, with whom I hadn't practiced in many decades because we had moved. I really wanted to thank them, and so I went about reconnecting with them. I couldn't locate Bob Godley at first, but I ended up making an appointment with my first teacher, and I drove down to Gastonia, North Carolina, where he had retired, and I took him to lunch, and he's like 80-something at this point. And I recounted that really beautiful moment when he told me that I could, And it was clear to me that he didn't remember that. But I invited him nevertheless to be the guest at our next upcoming testing so that he could see what had become of the seeds that he had planted so long ago. And he came to our testing and he sat at the middle of this long table with about 15 judges, and he was the kingpin, guest of honor in this room with 500 people, and he got to experience what that had become. And it was beautiful for both of us. And not long after that, after continuing to try to reconnect with Mr. Godley, I found out that he had passed some time ago. So he never knew. And here's the thing. You don't know. You don't know if you're going to see the results of the seeds that you plant. You don't know. But you can trust that they're going to do good in the world. You can count on that. And we're presented with moments every day, and sometimes by the hour, to be in contribution to other people. It takes so little. So I invite you to be on the lookout for it and recognize those moments and engage with people when you have the opportunity and be a contribution and be part of making the greatest positive difference for the greatest number of people.